Good afternoon, or perhaps close to good evening. Uh, I am Susan Arnett. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Honolulu, Hawaii. I recently retired from the public defender's office. I teach at the University of Hawaii Law School, and I'm very happy to see you.
And I'm Andy Levy. I'm a trial lawyer in Baltimore, Maryland. I also teach at both of Maryland's law schools, the University of Maryland and the University of Baltimore.
Hi, thank you guys for being here today. My name is Anthony Miller. I am an alumni of the program as a student, as well as spending 10 years as a district coordinator helping to organize the program and coach teams and teachers in my home state of Nevada. And this is my first year judging at the national competition. So I'm really excited to be here and hear what you have for us today.
I would like you to introduce yourselves and your teacher. This does not count against your time, so please state your names clearly because I can't read them from here.
My name is Rachel Woods.
My name is Fernando Lara Lopez.
I'm Morgan Johnson.
And I'm Zay Doman, and our instructor is the illustrious Patrick Gainey.
Thank you. You may begin.
Could we read the question first, Susan?
Oh,
just confirm we're all on the same page.
Yeah, would you like me to read the question first, which I've totally forgotten as they told me to, not screw this up? We are doing Unit 4, Question 1, and begins with a quote from Rufus King. It would be inconsistent with the constitutional separation of the executive and legislative powers to let the prerogative, pardon power, be exercised by the latter. What were the framers' reasons for giving the president the pardon power, and do you agree or disagree with them? According to the framer James Wilson, if the president abuses the pardon power, he can be impeached and prosecuted. Do you agree with Wilson? Why or why not? In your opinion, what constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors? Please begin.
When deciding on who to be granted with the pardon power, the framers elucidated that the president should be given the expansive power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. In doing so, the framers deliberately separated the judicial function of government from the pardon power, hence obviating concern from English jurist William Blackstone, who stated that the supreme power of judging and pardoning should not be delegated to a quintessential entity, but such grant power comes with a quid pro quo, such as the impeachment power led by the legislative branch. Though guidelines to restrict the presidential power was set in Ex parte Garland 1866, ultimately leading with the 5-4 decision that the president's power should not be affected unless there were cases of suspicion that could lead to impeachment. The pardon power is robust, but there are 3 important restraints on it. First, a crime must have been committed for a pardon to be issued. Second, the presidential power is limited to federal crimes. And lastly, the president may not issue pardons in cases of impeachment. However, throughout the course of American history, we have seen an uprising in political opportunism used by many presidents, leading to the questioning of whether this power should or should not be dealt by one federal branch and whether it should be carried out by an entity that pardons with fastidious care.
The pardon power is a tool that can be thought of as a part of the checks and balances system. The president is given the power to absolve an individual guilty of a federal offense. However, these pardons are overseen by Congress. Congress oversees the president's use of the pardon power by prohibiting bribery and obstruction of justice, as well as having enacted laws to prohibit certain types of corruption, such as bribery. As a result, the president may not issue a pardon in exchange for a bribe, nor may he offer or issue a pardon to influence or tamper with a witness's testimony in an ongoing investigation. It is stated in the question that it would be inconsistent with the constitutional separation of the executive and legislative powers to let the prerogative be exercised by the latter, meaning that it would be too difficult to oversee and monitor the pardoning process if the power is given to the legislative branch as well as the executive branch. This is due to the fact that there are 435 representatives in the legislative branch compared to the 1 president in the executive branch that is given this power. Because there are so many more individuals in the legislative branch, it would be inefficient to give this power to the branch because of the extensive process that each individual pardon would have to go through.
A president that abuses the pardon power ought to be impeached and prosecuted. Imagine a scenario in which the president were free from consequences from his or her pardons. This would lead to rampant pardoning of political allies, family members convicted of federal crimes, and possible cohorts of crimes which implicate the president, the very definition of obstruction of justice. Yet we see this exact type of behavior. Donald Trump gave out pardons like candy, granting them to allies like Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and so on. Bill Clinton pardoned his half-brother Roger for drug trafficking charges, and Mark Rich, a campaign contributor convicted of tax evasion and racketeering. Why were neither of these presidents impeached for this reason? The problem is that a legitimate pardon is different for every person. Would pardoning Julian Assange be improper, or Edward Snowden? If President Biden were to pardon either of them, would he be impeached for abusing the pardon power? Pardons are often conducted as the president is leaving office, so as to not draw attention or ire from media or other politicians. So actually realizing an impeachment for pardon is difficult to imagine. But pardons should only serve their original purpose, checking the authority of the legislative branch. Any other use ought to be looked into.
Aside from treason and bribery, the Constitution fails to enhance upon what a high crime or misdemeanor consists of. The face value implies that a high crime or misdemeanor are limited to offenses punishable in criminal court. The practical reasoning behind this idea, however, is an understanding that by only removing presidents for indictable crimes, we would be leaving the nation defenseless against the most dangerous kinds of presidential behavior. Stemming from British Parliament in 1376, impeachment was formed to be an open-ended practice providing both flexibility and some measure of guidance to the checks and balances, the flexibility being born from the parliamentary practice of defining impeachment on a case-by-case basis, while the guidance can be procured from centuries of practice one can rely on to understand what deems impeachment. Ultimately, the foremost argument against the claim that impeachment should require actus reus, a criminal act on behalf of the official, is the sheer absurdity of the proposition itself. The British Parliament pioneered the practice, the American framers adopted it, both as a means of rescuing their respective constitutions from downfall at the hands of maladministration. We are now ready for your questions.
Thank you. You gave us some examples of what you consider to be inappropriate uses of the pardon with President Trump and President Clinton, for example. I'm interested in whether you think there or can give us examples of any appropriate uses of the presidential pardon power, if you think there are any. And regarding those that are inappropriate, what is your solution to trying to correct that? Do we just have to live with the bad in order to get the good, or is there a way in which it could be limited to correct it so we don't have bad examples?
I personally believe that an appropriate use of the pardon power would be to pardon one Edward Snowden, who really only had the common good in mind and the safety and security of our American people.
And as for to say how we should limit pardon power through inappropriate uses, we can either take two different yellow brick roads, one being amending it constitutionally or passing it through legislatively. And even though we've seen in the past that a proposed amendment usually takes time and is way too hard to pass, we can push that for the time being and go for a more reasonable bill, such as the recent bill that we introduced in 2020, which is called Protecting Our Democracy, which basically controls how certain relationships connected to the president should be banned through pardons.
And going off of what Fernando said, I think our legislators need to be a lot more aggressive in using their impeachment powers against presidents that abuse the pardon power. If you look at someone like Richard Nixon, who was very lenient towards people like Lieutenant William Cawley, who participated in the My Lai massacre. I mean, this is an instant where American service members were using infants as target practice straight out of Nazi handbooks. And, you know, Nixon had the gall to sort of be lenient to those people who could have been there and prevented it. So I think our senators and representatives need to push a lot more for impeachment in instances like that where the pardon is obviously abused.
I agree with all my teammates completely. I think that if we don't do anything about the abuse of the pardon power, it will just continue to get more and more of like a slippery slope, and going downhill, it will progressively get worse.
Let me push back a little bit. And so if I, for the sake of argument, disagree that Ed Snowden is deserving of a pardon because he put the lives of people at risk by doing what he did, how do you resolve, isn't that just a classic political question that people can disagree about, and therefore the president does it? It sounds like your test is whether you agree or disagree that a particular pardon was a good idea or not. That's not a very principled way to make these decisions, is it?
Well, let's go with your example of Edward Snowden. It's not as if Edward Snowden just released all these papers related to NSA spying without vetting them. He and journalist Glenn Greenwald, who worked with The Guardian at the time, thoroughly went through all the papers that they were about to release to make sure that.
But Zaid, you're just addressing the merits. Whether you're right or wrong, it doesn't seem very principled. You're just arguing on policy and giving me your opinion. You may be right, but how do we, is that the test, whether I happen to think you're right or wrong or not?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that pardons should be allowed, and I think they're morally just if they benefit the common good. So for example, Edward Snowden, I think he greatly benefited the common good by revealing this information that the NSA was unjustly tapping wires, looking at phone call records, not just of American citizens, but of foreign agents as well. For example, if he could reveal that.
Do you think that's something on which reasonable people could disagree about?
Yes, I do. And I happen to side with the fact that Edward Snowden was protecting the common good, which is why I think that should be the factor determining whether or not a pardon is just or not.
I understand. Can any of your colleagues give me a principled way of distinguishing good pardons from bad pardons, other than whether you think they're good or bad?
Going off what you're saying, I have to admit this is a common issue in our current political system, that we are currently unable to agree on anything, and that is why nothing is getting done. To go off of that, I think that has to do a lot with zero-sum politics and how whatever is best for the other side can't be good for you because it's the other party, even if it is better for the common good.
Okay, so I tend to agree with your statement earlier that impeachment should be used more aggressively by Congress. However, that isn't currently the case. It hasn't really been throughout American history. I mean, we've only had just over a handful of impeachments, and none of them were actually led to a conviction and a removal from office, right? So how would you propose a solution to this? What sort of systems or legislative action or judicial action or additional departments would you propose to alter the system, or maybe a way that we can alter the way we do impeachments to make them more effective so that we can actually have an effective answer to this? Because yes, hypothetically, impeachment being an aggressive use would maybe solve this problem. But since that's not tending to happen, what could we do? What should we do?
I think we could take the Department of Justice from the cabinet and separate it, and that would help greatly with this problem.
Okay, that's
Going
great.
off
Expand on that, please.
Going off of what Morgan said, they're actually looking at this idea of removing the Department of Justice from the cabinet and keeping it as an outer party to examine issues as this.
Okay, I would like to, go ahead.
I'm interested, the Department of Justice as a whole, or a part of it that specifically is to deal with pardons?
Well, the idea is that you would remove the entire Department of Justice from the presidential cabinet and have the Attorney General be appointed for a 10-year period, such as the FBI director, so that they have to stay in position with changing administrations. This would sort of make it more of a disinterested party when it comes to issues of justice within Congress and whatnot, so that it's not strictly a partisan issue. Because I think that's one of the main problems with impeachment, is it's inherently a partisan process. And there's also a high threshold to actually not only impeach a president, but prosecute them for their crimes.
Wonderful. In addition to, talking about the DOJ and making them more independent, in addition to perhaps abuse of pardon powers, there's been a lot of arguments recently about abuse of not prosecuting by the DOJ. Donald Trump said, lock her up, we're gonna fully prosecute Hillary Clinton. And then a lot of people thought that the Biden administration was going to fully prosecute Donald Trump when he left office. And neither of those seem to happen. Is that a problem in a similar vein to the abuse of pardon powers? Go ahead and take 20 seconds to just briefly respond to that, and then we'll be done.
I would wholeheartedly say that the core issue of this problem is that we spend way too much arguing about it rather than actually working to come up with a solution to it. We are not spending enough time actually investigating and actually forging a plan of action that we could put into use.
Wonderful.
Thank you. We
Great job.
have to stop because of time, but I'll just say a few comments to begin. A very nice initial presentation, I really liked some of your words. That the pardon power is robust. I mean, that's a word that brings up certain thoughts about it, and perhaps as an English major, I think words are important. The examples you gave about what you consider to be poor uses of the pardon. Some others may talk with you about the Snowden issue, but I must say that you're the first group, and we've had 12 now today, that used the My Lai massacre as an example of a poor pardon. I think it's an excellent example, and I'd actually use that phrase, Lieutenant William Calley of the My Lai massacre, because some may remember it from that. But you did a very good job of describing what that entailed, the action that was done by the person who was pardoned. So I thought that was quite effective. And your suggestion about the DOJ, again, it's something new. I haven't heard it today from anyone else. It's definitely thought-provoking, and a very interesting way of approaching the issue in many respects. Very nice job. Very nice job. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice job. I think that was the first time we heard people talk specifically about making the DOJ more independent today. And in fact, I was really excited to hear that in the last unit, because I think that's probably the closest to in line with my suggestions for how we would handle, we should improve this personally. And I thought that was a really interesting, effective and nuanced solution. I mean, I think that because that's what I would want to do. But I think you guys did a really, really great job overall. You had lots of excellent explanations. I think your 4-minute prepared remarks starting talking about ex parte was really good. And then talking about, how the nuance of the use of the pardon is very subjective, and we should really only investigate the use of the pardon when personal gain or impropriety is very likely to have occurred. I thought that was a really, really good way of summarizing it. And I think that you should have gone back to that to press back on Andrew's question, because I think there was a little bit of a miscommunication there. Andrew was saying, he doesn't say necessarily he disagrees with with your opinion on Snowden. He was saying that hypothetically, if he did, we have citizens, we have people, we have elected officials who all disagree on if a person should or shouldn't be pardoned. How do we decide? How do we determine, is it okay or not? Should a president be impeached for making the decision to pardon this person or not? Right? And I think you didn't get there. And that's why I asked my question about okay, how do we systemically handle this better? If impeachment isn't working, what processes could we put in place? Because I think that's what Andrew was trying to get to. And I think you had it because you said it in your speech, but I wish you would have been able to pick up on that and respond more to what Andrew said by saying, look, it doesn't matter if my opinion or your opinion disagree. If the president's opinion is that Edward Snowden should be pardoned, then it's okay. He can pardon them. That's his job. He was elected and can do that. The only time where we should limit that is if there is a likelihood that this is being done for corrupt reasons, for political gain or personal gain, or is really damaging to the country or damaging to the rule of law, right? And I think what Andrew was trying to get from you, and I don't want to speak for him, was that it doesn't matter that you and he disagree. We're not talking about Snowden, we're talking about who gets to make that decision. And it looks like your position, according to your 4-minute remarks, was the president does, whether we agree with him or not, right? Does that make that a little clearer where we were trying to go with that? Okay, and I don't think you guys did a bad job. I think there was just a little bit of a miscommunication on that one. I really love that you brought up Glenn Greenwald. And I'm a big fan of Glenn Greenwald myself. And my last comment, because I think you guys overall did a really excellent job, my last comment was you mentioned ex parte very clearly in your speech, in fact, right at the start. But then when we talk about giving examples of how we would change the system, you said, well, we could amend the Constitution or we could pass legislation. And you should have there maybe noted that, I mean, ex parte Garland makes it pretty difficult for us to pass any legislation to limit the pardoning powers of the president. So I think constitutional amendment's absolutely appropriate, but if you're going to use legislation as a way to do this, it's going to be pretty difficult, and you'd need to give a more specific example of how you would do that would still be in line with Garland. Okay. But I think that all of those things are very, very minor nitpicky points that I'm making because this is the national finals. So I can be very nitpicky. Overall, you guys obviously had a very, very strong command of all of the information. Great job.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So let me segue from that last point about your command of the facts, which I agree was remarkable. And if we'd had, but here's how I think Anthony did a nice job of sort of stating sort of how I was looking at it, but I would put it this way. If this were debating society and the question was resolved, Edward Snowden should be pardoned, and you were taking one side or the other, brilliant. You obviously have, you guys looked into it and you know a lot about it and you've got views on it. Or if this were mock trial and Edward Snowden were on trial and you were the defense lawyer, okay, everything you said would have been sort of fantastic. But that's not what this was. That's not what this question was. This question was, is the pardon power operating as envisioned? Why and why not? And how would you fix it? If you think the answer is no, and I think almost any sentient human being would say no, it's not working right. How would you fix it? And there are many possible acceptable answers to that question, but to me, the range of acceptable answers do not include, well, this is someone I think should have been pardoned. That doesn't advance the discussion of the question on the table. And that's why I kept sort of Zaid busting your chops, and I wasn't just trying to knock you around. I was really trying to get you to focus on what I thought was the question. And I think as like you guys are fantastic. And I would love to have this discussion with you, but with respect, this was not the forum to be having that discussion. And I think that whether it's in the responsiveness category, I don't think it's a lack of understanding, because you guys obviously do know your stuff. I just think that you were just too fixated on arguing a policy question but avoiding that, frankly, a more difficult question is, this is screwed up. How in the world do we fix it? So anyway, just in my defense, that's where I was coming from. But you guys believe me, I wish we had more time. I wish we could, if you guys were of age, this would be a great discussion to have over a beer. And I'm sure I would learn a lot. And I really mean that. So good luck to you, and thanks for participating, and just keep at it.
Yep, wonderful job today, guys.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Really, really excellent job. Yeah. I'm going to offer one hint, because this all started when I asked you to give me a good example, and you said Snowden. You might take a historical example that would be less controversial. Some people have mentioned Lincoln or Johnson's pardoning of Confederate soldiers. You might find one that you can say, well, most people think this was, had a public purpose and whatever. But really nice job, you guys. I hope you pat yourselves on the back and go get a good night's sleep. I know you got to get up and do this again tomorrow, or at least members of your team do. So thank you.